always told myself I was a good wife. For 10 years I played the role of Laura Sterling, the devoted partner to a man whose love language was financial stability and calculated gestures. Nathan wasn't cruel, not in the way that left bruises, but his indifference cut in places even deeper than wounds. He had built himself from nothing and I admired that, I truly did. But somewhere along the way, as his ambition took center stage, I became part of the background. A perfectly polished accessory for the man who had everything. The trouble with being part of someone's perfect image is that you forget what it's like to be seen. And then I met Daniel. It wasn't supposed to happen. Nothing ever is, right? It started as something small, a passing conversation at the country club while waiting for Nathan to finish one of his endless business meetings. Daniel was different from the men in Nathan's world. He didn't wear power like a weapon. He didn't calculate every word as if it were a chess move. He just existed in a way that made me remember who I had been before I became someone's wife. "Your husband's a lucky man," he had said that night, his voice warm but his eyes searching. I laughed. An empty practice sound. "I think he considers himself lucky for different reasons." Daniel raised a brow but didn't push. That was the thing about him. He never pressured, never demanded. He simply made room for me to fill the silence. And maybe that's why, 2 weeks later, I found myself lingering by the club's bar longer than necessary, hoping to see him again. And I did. What started as innocent conversation turned into shared glances, then long talks in the parking lot after late dinners with our respective spouses. He was married too, though he spoke about it the way someone speaks about an obligation rather than a love story. "She's a good woman," he admitted one night, staring out at the golf course bathed in moonlight. "But we haven't been in love for a long time." I should have walked away. I should have clung to my vows like a life raft. But instead I let myself drown. The first time Daniel kissed me, it was a slow unraveling, not a mistake made in the heat of passion but a choice, one I had been making for weeks before his lips ever touched mine. We met in stolen moments, in quiet corners of the world that didn't belong to Nathan or his empire. And for the first time in years I felt alive. But affairs don't stay secrets forever. It started with small things, a knowing glance from one of Nathan's colleagues, an offhand comment from his assistant about my new routine. Nathan wasn't stupid. He built his fortune by reading people, and it was only a matter of time before he started reading me. I told myself I had time. I was wrong. On the night of the gala, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the delicate chain around my neck, the one Daniel had given me. A foolish risk, but I craved something of his, something tangible to keep me anchored. As I smoothed my dress, Nathan stepped behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders. His grip was firm, almost possessive. "You look beautiful," he said, but his voice lacked warmth. "Thank you." I met his gaze in the mirror, searching for something, anything that hinted at suspicion. Nothing. For now. The night would change everything. I just didn't know how yet. The Sterling Foundation Gala was the kind of event that belonged in magazines. The chandeliers cast a warm glow over polished floors, and the room buzzed with the murmurs of business moguls and socialites, each playing their carefully constructed roles. It was the type of night where fortunes were secured with a handshake and marriages were nothing more than business mergers wrapped in designer silk. I had attended these galas for years, standing at Nathan's side like a trophy, smiling at all the right people, laughing at jokes I barely heard. But tonight I wasn't just Laura Sterling, the devoted wife. I was a woman with a secret burning beneath my skin, one that could turn this whole evening into a disaster with a single misstep. Nathan had been watching me. Not in the casual, absent-minded way he usually did, but with the precision of a man searching for a crack in a perfectly crafted facade. His hand rested on my lower back as we moved through the room, a touch that should have felt reassuring but instead felt like an anchor, keeping me tethered to the life I was quietly setting fire to. "Excuse me, I see someone I need to speak with," Nathan murmured against my ear before stepping away, leaving me alone in the middle of the crowded ballroom. And that's when I saw him. Daniel. He wasn't supposed to be here. His company wasn't in Nathan's circle, at least not yet. But there he was, standing by the bar, looking just as surprised to see me as I was to see him. My pulse quickened. I should have turned away, should have walked in the opposite direction, but my feet had a mind of their own, carrying me toward him through the sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits. Laura, he said, his voice low, almost a warning. What are you doing here? I asked, my fingers tightening around the stem of my champagne glass. My firm is looking into a potential partnership with one of Nathan's associates, he explained, glancing around the room as if he expected Nathan to materialize out of thin air. I didn't think you'd be here. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. You mean you didn't think I'd still be playing the part? Daniel's expression darkened. You don't have to do this. Not anymore. But I did. I wasn't ready to torch my life just yet, even if every stolen moment with him made me wish I was brave enough to do it. Laura. The sound of my name spoken from behind me made my blood run cold. I turned slowly, my stomach twisting into knots as I met Nathan's unreadable gaze. He looked from me to Daniel, his expression carefully composed, but there was something in his eyes, something calculating. I don't believe we've met, Nathan said smoothly, extending a hand. Daniel hesitated for half a second before taking it. Nathan Sterling, my husband continued, gripping Daniel's hand just a little too tightly. Daniel Carter, Daniel replied, matching Nathan's energy with equal force. I held my breath, watching as they sized each other up like predators in a cage. Nathan's grip finally loosened, and he turned his attention back to me, his smile polite but his eyes razor-sharp. I was just about to introduce you to one of our new investors, but it looks like you've already made friends. I forced a laugh, willing my hands to remain steady as I set my glass down. Daniel and I have crossed paths a few times. Nathan nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on me for a moment too long before shifting back to Daniel. Then I'm sure you'll excuse us. There was no room for argument in his tone. Daniel shot me one last look, one that said be careful, before nodding. Of course. Enjoy your evening. I didn't look back as Nathan led me away. He didn't say a word, not at first, but I could feel the weight of his silence pressing against my ribs, squeezing the air from my lungs. Finally he spoke. How long? My breath hitched. What? He turned to me, his expression unreadable. How long have you known Daniel Carter? I could have lied. I could have played dumb, pretended he was just some passing acquaintance. But Nathan was already suspicious. He was testing me, looking for a slip, a tell. Not long, I answered carefully. A few weeks. Nathan's jaw tensed, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something real flicker in his gaze. Not anger. Not cold calculation. Something worse. Doubt. He didn't trust me, and that meant I was running out of time. Nathan didn't say anything else about Daniel that night. But silence can be more dangerous than words. By the time we left the gala, the weight of his unspoken thoughts settled into the space between us like a growing chasm. In the car he didn't hold my hand, didn't offer a casual remark about the event like he usually did. Instead he stared out the window, his fingers tapping rhythmically against his knee. His mind working through something I wasn't privy to. It was worse than an argument. With Nathan, when he was angry, he would lash out in sharp, calculated words designed to cut but never wound permanently. But when he was quiet, when he was thinking, that's when he became the most dangerous man in the room. I folded my hands in my lap, keeping my posture relaxed even as my pulse hammered. Did you enjoy yourself? I finally asked, my voice even. Nathan didn't look at me, but his lips curled into a smirk, one that didn't reach his eyes. It was a productive evening. That was all he said. Not a word about Daniel. Not a mention of how he had studied the way I stood a little too close to him, how I held my breath when Nathan arrived, how my fingers trembled just slightly when I set my champagne glass down. Nothing. And that terrified me. When we arrived home, I slipped off my heels in the foyer, stretching my sore feet against the cool marble. Nathan loosened his tie, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off the night. You're awfully quiet, I noted carefully. He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. I have a lot on my mind. I forced a smile. Anything you want to talk about? Nathan's gaze lingered, studying me the way one might examine a piece of art, looking for imperfections they hadn't noticed before. Then, just as quickly, his features smoothed over into that effortless charm he wore so well. Not tonight, he murmured, brushing past me. Get some rest. And just like that he was gone. I stood there barefoot, my heart pounding in my ears. Nathan knew. Maybe he hadn't pieced everything together yet, but he was circling it, drawing closer with each passing moment. I had played this game for weeks, stealing time with Daniel in secret corners, convincing myself I had control over the situation. But I was wrong. Nathan wasn't the type of man to ignore a problem. He was the type to dismantle it piece by piece, quietly, until there was nothing left but the truth. And when he found it, there would be consequences. I lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling, my mind running through every possibility. Nathan was calculating, strategic. If he suspected something, he wouldn't confront me outright. He would gather proof. He would wait until the moment he had the upper hand. That's what terrified me the most. At some point in the early morning, exhaustion finally pulled me under. And when I woke, sunlight was spilling through the curtains, casting golden streaks across the bed. Nathan's side was empty. The faint sound of movement downstairs told me he was already up. For a moment, I considered rolling over and pretending everything was fine. That I hadn't just spent the night spiraling into panic. But the gnawing unease in my stomach wouldn't let me. I threw on a robe and made my way downstairs. Nathan stood at the kitchen island, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, flipping through something on his phone. He looked at ease, the way he always did when he was 2 steps ahead of everyone else. "Morning," I greeted, keeping my voice light. He glanced up, offering a small smile. "Morning." I moved toward the coffee machine, trying to appear as normal as possible, but I could feel his eyes on me. "You left early," I noted. "Had a few things to take care of." I turned, leaning against the counter. "Work things." Nathan took a slow sip of his coffee before finally meeting my gaze. "Something like that." A chill ran down my spine. I needed to see Daniel. I needed to know if Nathan had done something, if he had confronted him, sent a warning, or worse. But reaching out too soon would be a mistake. Nathan was watching me now, waiting for me to make a move. I had to be smart. I spent the day playing my role. Meeting with the charity board I volunteered with, having lunch with the women I called my friends but barely knew. I smiled, laughed at all the right moments, pretended that nothing had changed. But my mind was elsewhere. When I finally got the chance to check my phone in the afternoon, I saw a message from Daniel. "Daniel, we need to talk. Tonight." My pulse quickened. That wasn't like him. Daniel was careful. If he was willing to take this risk, something was wrong. Me, not a good idea. A few minutes passed before his reply came. "Daniel. I'm not waiting, Laura. Meet me at the club. 9 p.m. I swallowed hard. Nathan would notice if I made an excuse to leave. But if Daniel was willing to break protocol, if he was willing to take this kind of risk, it meant whatever was happening was worse than I thought. That night I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing down the silk of my dress, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. Nathan sat in the armchair by the window, flipping through one of his financial reports, acting as if he wasn't paying attention. I turned, tilting my head. "I forgot I promised to meet with Chelsea tonight. I won't be long." Nathan didn't look up. "Of course," he murmured. But as I grabbed my purse and walked toward the door, his voice stopped me. "Oh, Laura." I turned, my breath catching. Nathan smiled. "Say hello to Daniel for me." The floor vanished beneath me. I forced my lips into a soft smile, my fingers tightening around my purse. "What?" Nathan set down his report, standing slowly, his movements deliberate. "You heard me." His eyes held no warmth, no anger, just cold, precise certainty. He knew. And this time he wasn't asking. For a moment the world around me ceased to exist. The walls of our meticulously decorated bedroom, the faint hum of the city beyond the window, the soft rustle of silk as I shifted on my feet, none of it mattered. All I could hear were Nathan's words, looping over and over in my head like a cruel melody. "Say hello to Daniel for me." I forced my expression to remain neutral, to not give him the satisfaction of watching me break. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice carefully measured. Nathan tilted his head slightly, his sharp eyes watching me with something almost akin to amusement. The kind of look a cat gives a mouse right before the final strike. "You're a smart woman, Laura," he murmured. "Don't insult me by pretending you don't know exactly what I'm talking about." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Denial would be pointless. Nathan wasn't the kind of man to bluff. If he had confronted me, it meant he already had what he needed, proof, leverage, something. Still, I had to try. Are you accusing me of something? I asked, my voice softer now, tilting the conversation just enough to suggest he was being paranoid. Nathan chuckled. Oh, Laura. You really are something else. He took a step forward, closing the space between us. I wonder, were you planning to leave me for him? My heart pounded against my ribs, but I kept my posture relaxed. You're being ridiculous. Am I? He studied me for a long moment, then reached into the pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his phone. With a few taps, he turned the screen toward me. A picture. Picture of me. With Daniel. I recognized the dim lighting of the country club's parking lot, the way I leaned into him, my hand brushing his chest in a way that could have been dismissed as friendly if not for the undeniable intimacy in our expressions. I felt the blood drain from my face. Nathan smirked at my silence. That was 2 nights ago, he said casually. Imagine my surprise when my wife, who insists she's just casual acquaintances with Daniel Carter, looks at him like that when she thinks no one is watching. I sucked in a slow breath, my mind scrambling for a response. You had me followed? Nathan clicked his tongue, slipping the phone back into his pocket. Of course I did. Of course he did. I had been so careful, so meticulous. And yet, I had underestimated him. Nathan wasn't just some rich businessman who married a beautiful wife for show. He was ruthless. And now, he had me exactly where he wanted me. I suppose this is the part where you threaten me, I said, finally meeting his gaze. Nathan's smirk remained, but there was something colder in his expression now. Threaten you? No, Laura. I don't make threats. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I make decisions. A chill crawled up my spine. I had spent weeks, months, convincing myself that I still had control, that I could juggle this secret life without consequence. But Nathan was reminding me, in the cruelest way possible, that I had never been in control at all. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, and I flinched. Not from fear of violence. Nathan had never raised a hand to me. But this was worse. This was strategy. You have a choice, he murmured. I swallowed hard. What choice? Nathan leaned in, his breath warm against my cheek. You will end it. Tonight. I stiffened. Daniel is waiting for you at the club, isn't he? Nathan continued, his voice laced with amusement. So go. Tell him it's over. I clenched my jaw. And if I don't? Nathan smiled, stepping back. Oh, Laura. He turned, walking toward the bedroom door. If you don't, then I'll make sure Daniel's life becomes very difficult. My stomach twisted. He wasn't lying. Nathan had the power, the influence, the resources to destroy Daniel's career, his finances, his entire world. And that was the real game here. Nathan didn't just want to win. He wanted me to be the one to fold, to break under the weight of my own choices. I watched him leave, my fingers digging into my palm as the bedroom door clicked shut behind him. I had walked into a trap, and now I had to figure out how to escape it. I arrived at the club just after 9. Daniel was already waiting in our usual spot on the outdoor terrace, his fingers drumming anxiously against the edge of his glass. He looked up as I approached, relief flashing across his face. What the hell is going on? He asked as soon as I sat down. I haven't heard from you all day. And then I get a message from a blocked number warning me to stay away from you. I swallowed hard. Nathan had moved fast. Daniel reached for my hand, but I pulled away, my throat tightening. You were right, I whispered. We can't do this anymore. His brows furrowed. Laura. Nathan knows. I cut him off, my voice barely above a whisper. He knows, Daniel. And if we don't stop this, he's going to ruin you. Daniel exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. So that's it? We just pretend none of this happened. What choice did we have? I had spent weeks feeling alive in his arms, convincing myself that love was worth the risk. But the reality was love had nothing to do with it anymore. This was survival. I forced myself to stand, my legs unsteady beneath me. I have to go. Daniel rose as well, his hands clenching into fists. This isn't over, Laura. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked away. Because the truth was, it was over. Nathan had won. And I had just played the final move in my own defeat. The drive home was silent except for the low hum of the engine and the sound of my own shallow breathing. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but it wasn't enough to stop the trembling. Nathan had won. That thought settled in my bones, heavier than any guilt I had felt before. I had walked away from Daniel, not by choice, not because my heart had stopped beating for him, but because Nathan had backed me into a corner and made me choose between the man I loved and the life I had built. I chose survival. Pulling into the driveway, I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the house that had once felt like home. Now it felt like a beautifully decorated prison. Nathan was waiting for me. I knew it before I even stepped inside. He wouldn't go to sleep, not yet. He would want to look me in the eyes to make sure I had done what he asked, to ensure I understood that this wasn't just a battle he had won, but the entire war. Sure enough, when I walked into the dimly lit living room, he was there. Seated in his favorite armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand, legs crossed as if he had been waiting patiently for me to return from an errand, not the forced execution of the only real happiness I had found in years. I closed the door behind me softly, taking slow, measured steps forward. I refused to let him see how shaken I was. His gaze lifted to mine, unreadable as always, but there was something in the way his lips curled, just slightly, that made my stomach turn. "How was your evening?" he asked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I swallowed hard. "It's done." Nathan tilted his head slightly, considering me. "You told him?" "Yes." "And?" I clenched my jaw. "And nothing. It's over." For a long moment, Nathan simply stared at me. The silence stretched between us, suffocating, as if he was daring me to break. Then finally he smiled. "Good girl." The word sent an icy chill down my spine. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to tell him that I wasn't his pet to be trained into obedience. But I didn't. I just stood there, rigid, as he took another slow sip of his drink. "You understand now, don't you?" he murmured, setting the glass down on the side table with a quiet clink. "I always win, Laura. Always." My throat tightened. "Go to bed," he continued, dismissing me like I was a child. "You've had a long night." I should have walked away. I should have left the room, gone upstairs, locked the door, and pretended I could ignore the storm brewing inside me. But I couldn't. I took a slow step forward, my pulse roaring in my ears. "What now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Nathan arched a brow. "What do you mean?" "You have what you wanted," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I ended it. So what happens next?" He studied me, his fingers tapping idly against the glass. "That depends." "On what?" His smirk deepened. "On how well you behave." The leash had tightened. I wasn't just under Nathan's control. I was trapped. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face. The hurt in his eyes, the way his jaw had tensed when I walked away. "This isn't over," he had said. And maybe, just maybe, he was right. Because the next morning, when I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand, my heart nearly stopped when I saw his name. "Daniel." My fingers hovered over the screen. I knew I shouldn't answer. I knew that Nathan would be watching, waiting for me to slip. But I did it anyway. I slid out of bed quietly, moving into the bathroom before answering in a whisper. "Daniel, what are you doing? You think this is over?" His voice was tense, low. "You think I'm just going to disappear?" "You have to," I hissed. "Nathan, he's not bluffing, Daniel. He will ruin you." "I don't care." I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my fingers against my temple. "You should. Please just let this go." A long pause. Then, "I love you, Laura." Tears burned my eyes. "Don't say that." "It's the truth." My hand trembled against the phone. "I have to go." "Laura." I hung up. For a long time I stood there, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I had made my choice. But I wasn't sure how much longer I could live with it. I spent the rest of the morning in a daze, moving through the motions of my carefully constructed life as if nothing had changed. Breakfast was prepared, emails were answered, and polite smiles were exchanged. But inside, my stomach twisted with the weight of what I had done. Nathan was still playing his role too. He kissed my cheek before leaving for work, his touch lingering just long enough to remind me that he was watching, that my obedience wasn't just expected, it was demanded. And yet, even as I watched him walk out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that I was standing on the edge of a precipice and soon there would be no turning back. I hadn't expected to hear from Daniel again. Not after last night. Not after the way I had broken him with my silence. But when my phone buzzed that afternoon, my heart nearly stopped when I saw his name again. I shouldn't answer. I knew I shouldn't, but I did. "Daniel, stop," I whispered as soon as I picked up. "This has to end." "I can't," he said, his voice tight. "Not like this. You have to." "No," he said, firmer now. "I won't. Meet me, Laura." I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing a hand against my temple. "Daniel, please. One last time." Silence stretched between us. One last time. That was all he was asking. A final goodbye, a moment just for us. No more secrets. No more stolen glances in dimly lit rooms. Just us, standing in the wreckage of what we had built. I should have said no. But instead I whispered. "Where?" I met him at the lake house. It was a place neither of us had ties to. A quiet, forgotten property Daniel had access to through a friend. No prying eyes, no chance of running into someone who might recognize us. No Nathan. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, Daniel was already waiting. He stood by the porch, hands shoved into his pockets, his expression tense. I stepped out of the car slowly, my breath unsteady. "This is a mistake," I said. "I don't care." His voice was hoarse, raw with something I didn't want to name. I hesitated, but then Daniel closed the distance between us, his hands cupping my face, his forehead pressing against mine. "Tell me you don't love me," he whispered. "Tell me, and I'll let you go." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Because I couldn't lie. Not about this. Instead, I let him kiss me. And for a moment I forgot everything. Nathan. The lies. The consequences. There was only Daniel. Only the way his hands mapped my skin like he was trying to memorize me. Only the way his breath tangled with mine, desperate and aching. But reality had a cruel way of catching up. And this time it arrived in the form of a phone ringing. "Nathan." I froze, staring at the screen, my heart slamming against my ribs. Daniel tensed beside me. "Answer it." I did. "Hello." Nathan's voice was smooth, calm. Too calm. "Where are you?" I swallowed hard. "At the club." Silence. Then, "You sure about that?" A chill ran down my spine. I turned, my eyes darting toward the road. That's when I saw it. A black car. Parked just beyond the trees. Watching. Nathan knew. I hung up without another word. Daniel followed my gaze, his expression darkening. He found us. I grabbed my keys, my hands shaking. "I have to go." But before I could move, Daniel caught my wrist. "No," he said. "Not this time." My pulse pounded in my ears. "Daniel." "I'm done hiding," he said. "I won't let him control you." Tears burned in my eyes. "You don't understand. He's not invincible, Laura." But he was. Nathan didn't make threats. He made decisions. And if I didn't fix this, if I didn't get out of here now, he would end Daniel in ways I couldn't even imagine. I wrenched my wrist free. "I have to go." Daniel's jaw clenched, but he stepped back. I didn't look back as I ran to my car. Didn't look back as I peeled out of the driveway, gravel kicking up behind me. Didn't look back. Even when I felt the weight of Daniel's gaze lingering on me. Because I already knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. I barely made it home without crashing. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. But it wasn't enough to stop them from shaking. My mind raced with possibilities, with consequences, with the terrifying realization that I had lost control. Nathan knew. He had been watching me, following me. And if he had gone through the trouble of tracking my every move, of making sure I felt the pressure of his presence, then that meant one thing: this wasn't over. It was just beginning. Nathan was waiting for me when I got home. I stepped inside, my pulse hammering in my ears, and there he was, standing in the center of the living room, his back to me, one hand in his pocket, the other swirling a glass of whiskey. The way he stood sent a chill down my spine. Slow. Calculated. In control. I swallowed hard, closing the door softly behind me. "Nathan." He didn't turn. For a long moment, he simply stood there, the ice in his glass clinking softly against the crystal. Then finally he spoke. "I gave you a choice." My throat tightened. I didn't respond. He turned slowly, and the moment his eyes met mine I knew I was trapped. Nathan wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't accusing me. He was calm, and that was so much worse. He took a slow sip of his drink, then set it down on the coffee table with deliberate ease. "Tell me, Laura," he murmured. "Do you enjoy lying to me?" I opened my mouth then closed it again. There was no point in pretending anymore. He already knew. Nathan took a step toward me, then another. His movements were slow, almost lazy, like a predator toying with its prey. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" he continued. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Nathan, Sure." He held up a hand, silencing me. I froze. Then he pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped the screen and turned it toward me. My stomach dropped. It was a picture of me and Daniel. Not just from tonight. From weeks ago. Different locations. Different nights. Different stolen moments where I had let my guard down and allowed myself to believe I was safe. Nathan had been watching for a long time. I took a shaky breath. "What do you want from me?" He tilted his head. "What do I want?" He let out a soft, humorless chuckle, shaking his head as if I had just asked the stupidest question imaginable. Then his expression hardened. "I want you to understand something," he said, voice sharp as glass. "This isn't a negotiation." A lump formed in my throat. Nathan took another step, closing the space between us. "You think this is about your little affair?" he murmured, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "No, Laura. This is about loyalty." I flinched. Nathan smiled. "You made a mistake," he continued. "And now I have to remind you who owns you." The word hit me like a slap. I stiffened. "You don't own me." Nathan's smirk deepened. "Don't I?" His fingers ghosted along my jaw, the touch feather-light, almost affectionate. "You think leaving him was enough?" he whispered. "You think that makes up for it?" My breath caught. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Nathan pulled back, studying me like he was trying to decide whether or not I was worth the trouble. Then after a long pause he exhaled. "That depends." "On what?" His gaze darkened. "On how much pain you're willing to watch him suffer." My stomach lurched. Daniel. Nathan wasn't going to punish me. He was going to punish him. I sucked in a sharp breath. "Nathan. You don't get to say his name," he snapped, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. I flinched. He closed his eyes for a moment, collecting himself. When he looked at me again, the mask of calm had returned. "I have a meeting in the morning," he murmured. "Go to bed." I just stood there frozen. "Go to bed, Laura." I didn't move until he did. Until he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the middle of the room with my heart pounding and my hands shaking. I had thought the worst had already happened. I had been so wrong. Because Nathan wasn't done. He was just getting started. That I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of Nathan's words pressing down on my chest like an iron vice. "This isn't a negotiation. How much pain are you willing to watch him suffer?" He hadn't even needed to say Daniel's name. The threat was clear. Nathan wasn't planning to hurt me. That would be too easy. Too predictable. No, he wanted me to watch, to witness firsthand what happens to people who take things that belong to him. And Daniel? Daniel had no idea what was coming. By the time morning arrived, my body ached with exhaustion, but my mind was alert, thrumming with adrenaline. I needed to warn Daniel. Needed to find a way to get ahead of whatever Nathan was planning. But I had no idea how. Nathan was already gone when I stepped downstairs, the house eerily quiet. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was dread. Because if he wasn't here, it meant he was out there doing something. I grabbed my phone and hesitated for only a second before dialing Daniel's number. 1 ring. 2. 3. Straight to voicemail. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the device. "Call me back," I texted. "It's important." Then I waited. And waited. But Daniel didn't answer. It wasn't until noon that I finally got the call. Not from Daniel. From an unknown number. A cold wave of fear washed over me as I answered. "Hello." A deep voice, unfamiliar but composed. "Mrs. Sterling." The way he said my name made my stomach churn. "Who is this?" I asked, gripping the counter for support. "I work for your husband," the man said simply. "Mr. Sterling asked me to pass along a message." My heart slammed against my ribs. "What message?" I whispered. There was a pause, then, "Check your email." The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, frozen, my pulse roaring in my ears. Then with shaking hands I opened my laptop and pulled up my inbox. A single new email. No subject. No sender name. Just a link. Clicked it. And the moment the video loaded, my blood ran cold. Daniel was on the screen. He was outside his office building, his face tight with barely contained rage as he argued with someone just out of frame. His stance was tense, his fists clenched at his sides. Then suddenly, 2 uniformed officers stepped into the frame. My breath hitched. Daniel turned toward them, his expression shifting from anger to confusion. One of the officers spoke, gesturing toward him, and within seconds, they were reaching for his wrists. "No. No, no, no." I watched, horrified, as they cuffed him. Daniel resisted at first, his voice rising, but they pushed him toward a squad car, shoving him inside as pedestrians gathered, whispering and recording. Then the video cut off. My stomach twisted so violently I thought I might be sick. I pressed a hand to my mouth, my breaths coming fast and shallow. Nathan had done this. He had planned this. I knew without a doubt that the charges were fabricated. Nathan wouldn't be so reckless as to frame Daniel for something real. No, he would do what he always did. He would manipulate, control, and use his endless resources to make Daniel look guilty of something that could ruin him. And I had let it happen. I slammed the laptop shut, my mind spiraling. Daniel was in jail. Nathan had won. Again. And this time I wasn't sure how to fight back. I sat in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity before my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I answered without hesitation. "You bastard," I spat. Nathan chuckled on the other end of the line. "Good afternoon to you too, darling." "Let him go," I seethed. Nathan sighed, as if I had just said something mildly disappointing. "You're not in a position to make demands, Laura." I gripped the phone tighter. "You did this." "Of course I did." His voice was maddeningly calm. "And I'll keep doing it until you understand." My throat burned with unshed tears. "Understand what?" Nathan's voice dropped, his words slow and deliberate. "That you belong to me." A violent shudder ran through me. "You're a monster," I whispered. Nathan hummed thoughtfully. "No, Laura. I'm a man who doesn't tolerate betrayal." My eyes burned as I squeezed them shut. "Please," I choked out. "Please let him go." A long silence. Then, "You want him free?" Nathan murmured. "Fine." My breath hitched. "But there's a price." I should have known. There was always a price. "What do you want?" I forced out. Nathan chuckled again, this time softer, almost affectionate. "Come home, Laura," he said. "Be the wife you pretended to be all these years. And in return, I'll let Daniel go." I swallowed hard. "And if I say no?" The warmth in Nathan's voice disappeared. "Then Daniel will spend the next 10 years rotting in a prison cell for a crime he didn't commit." A sharp, broken sound escaped me. Nathan let the silence stretch, giving me time to let his words sink in. Then when I said nothing, he murmured, "See you at dinner." And the line went dead. I stared at the phone in my trembling hands, my vision blurring. Nathan had left me no choice. I could fight. I could try to take him down, to expose the lies, to somehow free Daniel from this nightmare. But I knew the truth. Nathan was too powerful, too careful. He didn't lose. If I pushed, he would bury Daniel so deep he'd never see the light of day again. There was only one way to stop this. Only one way to keep Daniel safe. I had to give in. I had to surrender. My stomach twisted violently, but I knew. Tonight I would walk back into that house. And Nathan would win. Again. By the time I arrived home that evening, the sky had darkened, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. Nathan had won. At least that's what he thought. As I stepped inside, the familiar scent of cedarwood and expensive cologne clung to the air, wrapping around me like a suffocating rope. The house was quiet, too quiet. Nathan was waiting. Of course he was. I found him in the dining room, sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, a crystal decanter of whiskey beside him, his posture relaxed. A man at peace. He didn't even look up as I entered. "Took you long enough," he murmured, swirling his drink. "I was beginning to think you'd make me wait all night." I clenched my fists at my sides, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I did what you wanted." Nathan lifted his gaze slowly, a smirk playing at his lips. "Did you?" I swallowed hard. "You said if I came home you'd let him go." Nathan chuckled, taking a slow sip of his drink. "I did say that, didn't I?" He set the glass down with a soft clink before leaning forward, his fingers tapping against the table. "But tell me something, Laura. How do I know you won't run back to him the first chance you get?" I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Because I know what you're capable of." Nathan studied me for a long moment, his eyes gleaming with something unreadable. "You should have thought of that before you spread your legs for another man." The words cut deeper than I expected, but I didn't let it show. I refused to give him that satisfaction. Instead, I inhaled slowly and lifted my chin. "Let him go, Nathan. You have me now." Silence. Then, Nathan exhaled through his nose, shaking his head with a small, amused smile. "You're really trying to convince me, aren't you?" He stood, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve before walking toward me. "You think this is over?" My heart pounded as he stopped just inches away. He reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear in a mockery of tenderness. "You'll never be free, Laura," he murmured. "Not really." I held my breath as his fingers trailed down my jaw, his touch feather-light, a silent reminder of the power he held. Then just as quickly he stepped back. "But since I'm feeling generous," he reached for his phone, dialing a number. My pulse hammered as he pressed the device to his ear. "Let him go," Nathan said simply. A pause. Then a faint voice on the other end, one I couldn't quite make out. Nathan smirked. "No charges. Make it disappear." Another pause. Then he hung up. I released a shaky breath, my knees nearly buckling. It was over. Daniel was free. Nathan tilted his head. "There. That wasn't so hard, was it?" I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "Thank you." His smirk deepened. "Don't thank me yet, darling." A chill ran through me. Nathan had gotten what he wanted me. But I knew this wasn't the end of the punishment. He wasn't done making me pay. And I wasn't done fighting. That night I lay beside him in bed, my body stiff, my mind running through every possible escape. Nathan had won this round. But I had one last card to play. A secret I had been keeping from him. And if I played it right, it would be his downfall. That I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while Nathan slept soundly beside me. To him the game was over. He had won. He had broken me, pulled me back under his control, made me surrender. And Daniel? He was free, but at what cost? Nathan had proven that he could destroy him with a single phone call, that my decisions were not my own. But Nathan had underestimated me, because he didn't know my secret. The next morning I played the part. I greeted Nathan in the kitchen with a soft smile, poured him a cup of coffee the way I used to, even kissed him on the cheek before he left for work. "Good girl," he murmured before stepping out the door. The moment he was gone, I sprung into action. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only person who could help me now. Marissa King, Nathan's CFO. The woman who had been warning him for months about his shady financial dealings. The one he had dismissed every time she raised a red flag. She answered on the second ring. "Laura, we need to talk," I said, my voice low. A pause. Then, "I was hoping you'd call." An hour later, I sat across from her at a quiet cafe on the other side of town. Marissa had always been sharp, loyal to Nathan for years, but she wasn't blind. She had seen what he was becoming, ruthless, reckless. And now she was ready to turn on him. "I've been keeping records," she said, sliding a flash drive across the table. I stared at it, my breath catching. "What's on it?" I asked. "Everything," she said. "Fraud. Embezzlement. Offshore accounts. If this gets out, Nathan won't just lose his company, he'll go to prison." I exhaled slowly, gripping the drive tightly in my palm. This was it. This was my way out. My final move. That night, I waited for Nathan to return home. He walked in as if he owned the world, loosening his tie, pouring himself a drink, completely oblivious to the fact that his empire was about to crumble. "You're in a good mood," I said, watching him carefully. He smirked. "Why wouldn't I be? Everything is exactly how it should be." I tilted my head. "Is it?" Nathan froze mid-sip, lowering his glass slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" I took a slow step forward, the flash drive burning in my palm. "It means I know everything, Nathan," I said softly. "The money, the fraud, the lies." His expression didn't change at first, but I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Something dark, something dangerous. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said smoothly. I smiled. "Don't I?" I tossed the flash drive onto the table between us. Nathan stared at it, his jaw tightening. "Where did you get that?" "Doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is what I'm going to do with it." Silence. Then, Nathan let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "You really think you can threaten me, Laura?" I didn't blink. "No, Nathan. I think I can end you." He took a step closer, his presence towering over me. But this time I didn't flinch. For the first time, he was the one losing control. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice quieter now. I met his gaze. "A divorce." Nathan's jaw clenched. "I walk away," I continued. "Clean. No fights, no drawn-out battles. You let me go, and in return this," I gestured to the flash drive, "stays buried." Nathan was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You bitch," he muttered. I smiled. "Does that mean we have a deal?" Nathan glared at me, his mind undoubtedly racing with ways to fix this, to find a way to win. But for the first time there was no winning for him. Only survival. He downed the rest of his drink, then slammed the glass onto the table. "Fine," he spat. "You want out? You got it." Relief flooded through me. But then Nathan leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You think you're free now?" he murmured. "You'll never be free, Laura." A shiver ran down my spine. But I refused to let fear rule me anymore. I turned, walking away, leaving him standing in the wreckage of the empire he thought was untouchable. I had won. But at what cost? Because as I stepped outside, inhaling the cool night air, I knew one thing for certain. Nathan Sterling would never let go. And this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.